Good evening, and thank you for joining us for a webinar about the recently developed recovery plan for American shad in the James River. My name is Tom Dunlap, and I'm the James River Keeper with the James River Association, and I will be your moderator tonight. We'll go ahead and post an agenda for tonight's meeting in the chat window now so that you all can follow along. Over the course of the next 40 minutes, we hope you will learn about the plight of the American shad in the James and the plans in motion to help rejuvenate this iconic species in our river. After our experts have had a chance to provide background information, we plan to have a question and answer session for you.
That is your key.
So please plan to stick around and participate. Before we get going, I would want to tackle a couple of Zoom etiquette items with you all. We ask that you please keep your microphone muted as we go through the presentations during the first portion of tonight's webinar. And if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat window or hold them until the end of the meeting, and we will do our best to answer as many as we can. Additionally, we're going to be recording this webinar for use on our website and social media channels and hope that you can refer back to it as a resource. I'm going to provide a very brief introduction as to why we're on this particular call this evening, and then turn things over to our expert guests. So let's get started. The American shad was once a major commercial fishery along the Atlantic coast, holding economic, cultural, and ecological significance in the James River and the Chesapeake Bay. Due to a significant drop in the American shad population from the height of commercial landings in the 1950s and 60s, a complete fishing moratorium was ultimately imposed in 1994. This period was followed by years of attempts to boost American shad in the James through fish stocking carried out by the Department of Wildlife Resources. Unfortunately, these efforts proved unsuccessful and were eventually discontinued in 2017. And you can see and visualize this in this period through the figure on the left here. In 2021, a Virginia Institute of Marine Science assessment revealed that American shad populations in the James River had fallen to 0% of the target goal, underscoring the need for an American shad recovery effort in the James. The James River Association helped secure funding for the state's budget after our 2021 State of the James report, which highlighted this 0% score for American shad as an indicator of overall river health. And this report was published by the Virginia Institute of Marine Science and William and Mary's Virginia Coastal Policy Center. In November, this plan, titled A Framework for the Recovery of American Shad in the James River, Virginia, was delivered to the Virginia Secretary of Natural and Historic Resources and the General Assembly. To delve deeper into American shad tonight, we have with us three experts to help lay the foundation for questions you may have about American shad. First up this evening is Albert Spells, formerly of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And then we will have Eric Hilton with the Virginia Institute of Marine Science. And finally, Mike Bednarski with the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources. To break the ice a little bit this evening, Albert, Eric, and Mike, would you be so kind as to tell us what your title is, a little about your work, and perhaps a personal or professional relationship you have with American shad? And Albert, I'm going to start this evening off with you.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Albert Spells. I'm one of the old codgers around here. I am a retired fish biologist from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I served with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for 40 years. My roles there included the project lead of the Virginia Fisheries Coordinator's Office, and for 10 years, I managed the Harrison Lake National Fish Hatchery. During my professional duties, I was responsible for coordinating the fish passage programs in Virginia, removing several dams from the rivers and working always with the Virginia Department of Game and Inland Fisheries, now Department of Wildlife Resources. As hatchery manager, I was working there when we started the stocking program at Harrison Lake in 1994. I think the state had been stocking for 2 years at that time.
Great, thank you. Eric?
All right. Thank you. I'm Eric Hilton. I'm a professor of marine science at the Virginia Institute of Marine Science at the College of William and Mary. and I'm the chair of the section of natural resources at VIMS. I'm also the curator of the Nunnally Ichthyology collection at VIMS. My entry point into American Shad began about 13 years ago when I took the role of principal investigator on the VIMS Alosa monitoring program. This was the state's monitoring program to comply with the mandates from the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission that Dr. John Olney had begun in 1998. And when he passed away, I rose to the ranks, I guess. And so I've been on a learning curve since, working with great colleagues, Albert, and colleagues at the Department of Wildlife Resources to learn, and my staff and colleagues at VIMS. And so for the last 13 years, I've been immersed in shad and now river herring as well. So
Thanks, Eric. Mike, you're last up.
If have me follow Eric and Albert, I'm not sure I can fill those that gap, but I'm Mike Bednarski. I'm the Chief of Fisheries over the Department of Wildlife Resources. I'm responsible for administering the statewide freshwater and tidal freshwater fisheries program that we have here. My personal connection with shad, my professional experience prior to working with DWR was actually with diadromous fish. I'm pleased to say I've been lucky enough to collaborate with scientists and publish papers on diadromous fish such as American eel, short-nosed sturgeon, Atlantic sturgeon, and river herring. American shad are a notable gap in that publication record, but I will say I was lucky enough to work on one of the last stock assessments on American shad. And I think that really helped to galvanize the approach that I take personally with restoring American shad, and quite honestly has provided motivation to help put shad into a place where it needs to be moving forward. That assessment was not the most uplifting thing I've ever been involved with, if I'm being honest with the group.
Well, and that's why we're on this call today, Mike. But thank you very much for all of you introducing yourselves. And I think you can all tell on this call why we've asked these folks to come talk to us about shad. Albert, I'm going to ask that you get the ball rolling for us this evening with a little background on American shad in the James River. And I'm going to queue up some images for you.
Okay. Look, I'm just flattered anybody calls me an expert on anything. So, but we'll start. American shad is Alosa Sapidissima, or the most savory shad. It's a member of the river herring family. It's a family of anadromous fish that swims into the James River annually. It includes the blueback herring and alewife and hickory shad. The shad's also referred to as the white shad, and it's anadromous, spending most of its life in the ocean and coming back into fresh waters in the spring to spawn. And just imagine in your mind's imagination that these large schools of silvery bodied fish are swimming along the Atlantic coast for 4 to 5 years, and then coming into the bay, making a left turn into the James River, swimming up the James River to their spawning grounds. In the James River, shad return to the river in the spring when water temperatures are in the mid-50s. They're broadcast spawners, meaning that the female, while swimming in the water column, releases her eggs. And as she releases her eggs, the males, several males, will fertilize those eggs. The eggs are semi-buoyant. They may float a mile or more away from the female before settling on the bottom, depending on the current conditions. That bottom type that the eggs settle on is very important. The eggs will remain viable if there is a dissolved oxygen concentration of 2 to 2.5 parts per million and a pH of 6 to 7 units. Young of the year American shad, after they've spawned and migrated down the rivers, they will leave those freshwater habitats and swim into the Chesapeake Bay in December, from November to December, in the year, and they will remain in that habitat for about a year until the next spring and March, where they will continue their ocean migration. Historically, shad in the James River ascended the river to the two tributaries that forms the James, the Jackson River and the Cowpasture River, more than 300 miles away from the mouth of the river into the Chesapeake Bay. They also swim up the Appomattox and the Chickahominy River. 4 centuries ago, an influx of abundant American shad would have been a godsend for humans and plants and animals. An influx of large fish into these undisturbed systems upstream where nitrogen for plants and insect growth was at a premium. It helped sustain that in-stream community that fed other parts of the food web. The fish, their eggs, their milk, their larvae, and their juveniles were significant sources of nutrients in those smaller upstream tributaries where a portion would die or be captured by raccoons and other predators, which were in turn hunted by people. Once in the ocean, American shad, because of their schooling nature, are undoubtedly preyed upon by many species, including sharks and tunas and striped bass and bluefish and seabirds and marine mammals. They're important to the food web of our ecosystems. Now, the seasonal arrival of these shad into the river, it may have signaled to the Native Americans that were living here at the time, it might have signaled to them survival, because it was at this time of the year that the Native Americans may have been at their lowest point in having the availability of food. Their winter food stores were low or depleted, and the game animals' fat had been used up, and there was no berries to gather. So it was very important to the survival of the people on the land that these American shad, and it signal survival to these people on an annual basis. And once the English colonists understood the seasonal fish runs, they began to harvest the fish as well. Now, when Captain John Smith came here in the Chesapeake Bay in 1607, it was estimated that there was 50,000 to 100,000 human beings in the watershed. 50,000 to 100,000 Native Americans were already here. They were living along the bay shores from the tidal Chesapeake up into the mountains. Now, they were here already. But now, I was reading an article in 2017. And in 2017, it was estimated there were 16 million people in the watershed of the Chesapeake Bay. 16 million. And the Census Bureau had estimated that 170,000 new residents moved into the watershed on an annual basis. 400 years ago, there were 1.6 people per square mile in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. Now, in the James River watershed today, we have 3 million people living on 10,000 square miles, equivalent to 300 people per square miles. I mean, there used to be a viable commercial fishery on the James River. In the 1950s, for example, the annual average catch was approximately 9 million pounds of fish per year, 9 million pounds. Landings took a substantial drop in the mid-1970s and has never recovered. In fact, if you look at the charts, you can see that landings started to decrease after 1959. They made a great dip in the mid-1970s. We thought we had some hope in the 1980s, but they dropped out. Those landings dropped again, and here we are today. We moved to 1994 when the fishing moratorium was put into place. There were no channel catfish, no largemouth bass, and yes, no blue catfish in the river 400 years ago. There were no dams. There was no dredging in the river 400 years ago. Human disruption of the ecosystem was minimal. As the New English society grew, however, and developed, human disruption in the watershed became more prevalent. Dams were built, river water was diverted, the river was dredged, and as time moved forward, water intake structures were placed in the river. Point discharge from manufacturing was made into the river. With the advent of agriculture, land disturbance via development, Non-point discharges were made throughout the watershed. Non-native species were introduced into the river to eventually include blue catfish in 1973. Blue catfish, that apex predator in the river, it makes up the largest biomass of any species in the river yet today. Fishing pressure increased, as did fishing efficiency. Habitat was eventually altered. And one estimate, for example, is that from the mouth of the Chickahominy River to Richmond, there used to be 400 hectares of submerged aquatic vegetation. Today, there's virtually none in the main stem of the James River. And I took this directly from the JRA website. I also saw it in an article, I think it was in Smithsonian Magazine some years ago, talking about the current status of American shad. It says, death by 1,000 cuts is the expression that comes to mind to describe the current status of American shad. American shad numbers in the James River apparently began to noticeably decline in the mid-1970s. They never recovered, and the Commonwealth of Virginia began a restoration stocking program in 1992, and it also initiated a fishing moratorium in 1994. Partnering with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Virginia Department of Game and Fisheries, currently the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources, we stock nearly 126 million shad fry into the James River. However, adult shad returning to the river to spawn never reflected the stocking effort, and fishery surveys indicated that the species continued to decline. The hatchery program was discontinued in 2017. Today, the American shad population in the James River is considered depleted, severely reduced in size, but not yet threatened as per the ESA, the Endangered Species Act definition. Impediments to American shad restoration in the James is complicated. And there's no one solution that would be effective to restore this magnificent fish. Current threats to restoration are barriers to fish migration. We have that dam. Those bugaboos have been around for a long time. Bosch's Dam was erected in 1823, put a fish passage there in 1999. But even when you get fish past the Bosch's Dam, they can swim freely up to Lynchburg. But once you get to Lynchburg, there's a series of dams in the James River, in the Lynchburg area, above Lynchburg. So we still have several dams that we need to address for the fish to freely pass up the river. Habitat availability and suitability. Below Richmond, for example, there's little to no refuge from predation for American shad, for the juveniles that are spawned in the river. There ain't no place to hide. And can you imagine what that must look like on a day-to-day basis? You're little fish swimming around, you're like French fries out there, and blue catfish are just picking you off as they choose because you got nowhere to run. Land use changes associated with population growth is centered primarily in high population areas, and these land use changes could be associated with contamination, to include PCBs and sediment loads and phosphorus, and the impacts of these land changes could help exaggerate the low summer DO levels in the river. Surface water withdrawal and discharge. Now, surface water is removed for power generation. We all like electricity, and they manufacture. We like stuff, and we like to eat food. So you have water for generation, for manufacturing, for agriculture. And the surface water withdrawals in Virginia include significant removal of water from various water sources, from ponds and reservoirs, from rivers, from springs, from underground wells. In 2019, water withdrawal within Virginia for the sources that I just named accounted for 89% of the water withdrawals in the whole state. 89%, 1.1 billion gallons a day. The surface water used by American shad are subject to significant withdrawals, with the highest volumes removed occurring in waters in and around Richmond and in the Hampton Roads area. Invasive species introduced predatory fishes may be a significant factor in recovery of imperiled population. It's recognized that introduced predators, such as invasive blue catfish, may have a disproportionate impact on young age classes in already depleted populations. In combination with other recovery actions, reduction in the density of invasive predatory fish has been shown to have positive effects on populations of fish conservation concern. Climate change. It's been demonstrated that the rise in ocean temperatures is having a negative effect on growth and physiology of North America, of many North Atlantic fish species. The timing of the migration have also been affected by the changing environmental conditions. I always wonder, what would it be like when we have warming water temperatures and fish may start to come into the spawning rivers earlier, and they spawn, and the zooplankton that they require to survive isn't there. There's a timing issue. And based on the results of VIM's, the low seed monitoring program, they have detected that American shad in the James River are now arriving 2 to 3 weeks earlier than they had earlier in these series of data collecting activities. And that's all I have, sir.
Wow, thank you, Albert. I think you really laid it out there for us. That was great. I think that's a good segue for you, Eric, if you'd be so kind as to talk to us a little bit about the plan development.
Sure. I don't know how I'll follow that. Albert laid out a very good overview of the challenges that American shad face and what we have what we encounter within the James River and what the shad encounter in the James River. And so with the results of not only the VIM's monitoring program, but all of the surveys that are conducted that encounter American shad point to one story of the decline of the species within not only the James River, but many of the rivers along the East Coast. The James River is particularly troubling because of we caught no fish. So in our survey, it's not that we've forgotten how to catch fish. It's that they're not there. It's something that we've seen in talking to the watermen that the commercial fishers that are out there, they are not encountering them either. So this is a real issue, and with the JRA prompting action at the state level, securing funds to enlist VIMS as sort of the lead on this, as along with the Center for Coastal Policy. Sorry, I messed up. VCPC, Virginia Center for Coastal Policy. I forget what the acronym is, but
Virginia
at the law
Coastal
school.
Policy Center, yeah.
Yes, thank you. It's somewhere in my head. So, but as Albert alluded to, it's not a single agency, it's not a single issue problem. And so when we began thinking about how to address and develop a recovery plan, or at least a framework for the recovery of the species, we had to bring in colleagues from a broad array of stakeholders, a broad array of expertise. Colleagues from the DEQ, the Department of Environmental Quality, others here at VIMS, the VMRC, DWR, other academic biologists and groups that have been working on American shad and Alosines in general, VCU, folks at Randolph-Macon, others at William and Mary, the JRA, to bring in the public perspective, Fish and Wildlife, and the tribes of Virginia. All of these stakeholders have something to offer for the recovery of American shad. And just as there's no silver bullet for cause of decline or the silver bullet for recovery, there's no single institution that can do this on its own. When we began discussing how to develop this, what ultimately became the report that we submitted to the Secretary of Natural History and Natural and Cultural Resources, we wanted to first identify, reconsider the causes of decline, many of which Albert just very, very nicely provided an overview. The issues of that impact the decline and the impediments that are there for recovery. You know, the changing landscape that American shad find themselves in. This was the basis for the start of our discussion. We reviewed the existing monitoring programs that are out there. So several surveys operated out from VIMS, the Department of Wildlife Resources, BMRC, basically looking at whatever data exists. And it's a repeating theme, the repeating result of all of these time series, all of these sets of data show the same thing in different fashions. So, you know, trying to dig deeper into what we could learn from the programs. And that's covering a wide swath of habitats as well, from freshwaters through the mouths of the rivers, through Chesapeake Bay, and even coastal data sets. With that, we also wanted to consider and take a look at what data gaps might be there to exist, or might exist in terms of what is the state of the habitat that American shad find themselves in. You've heard, you know, as an anadromous fish, these American shad are restricted largely to below the dams. There's certainly some passage through Boecher's, the fish lift at Boecher's, but by and large, the majority of the spawning stock in the James River is below Boecher's Dam. And taking a look at that habitat that these fish are trying to reproduce in was an important component of the recovery. If you don't have a good habitat for larvae, for eggs to hatch in, you won't get a survival of the species, or of that reproductive cohort. So one of the things we did, Grace Massey at VIMS headed up a very preliminary survey of the bottom conditions within and above the kind of historic spawning reaches of American shad. And that was conducted this summer with some high resolution bathymetry and high resolution sonar work, and coupled with sediment grabs. So seeing not just the acoustic sonar images, but what the sediments were like. And in that, you know, small sample of the spawning reach, we got mud. Mud is not a good habitat for spawning shad. So the eggs require a more hard, sandy, clean bottomed river, rocky bottoms. So right there, we need to do more in terms of figuring out what the habitat is like and what needs are there for mitigation. And so the group that we assembled, we met in October and developed a list of potential recommendations. These got synthesized, and you see on the slide really 5 main themes, several, and each of these have specific actionable items to them, continuing to and expanding the existing monitoring programs. So if we don't continue these surveys, we won't know how the stock is doing. So this is maintaining the surveys is a critical component of this. Looking at American shad habitat, improving that those spawning reaches. Are there ways to improve the bottom sediments, bottom habitats that are there? But first, we need to know what they are and how those fish are using them. So suggesting aspects of studying the early life history and the distribution and abundance of the larvae and eggs of American shad within the James River where we know that they're spawning. Reducing the mortality of American shad. And this theme is multi-part. There's Albert alluded to the issues of predation of by introduced non-native catfishes and other fishes, largemouth bass, whatever. They're I think Albert said French fries to these fish. Absolutely. There is some evidence that, by the numbers, catfish, maybe only have 5% of the catfishes have alosines or shad in their stomachs. But at a low level, such as what shad are at, that 5% is a very meaningful, very, big component of what is out there. And 5% of millions of catfish is a large number. They're swimming a gauntlet. And these small juvenile fishes are lucky to escape. And that's just one aspect of the mortality, the getting a handle and really doing some intense modeling of how much the cumulative effects of water withdrawals is a long-term project. And that's a 3-year project in and of itself to really get at how those the water intakes are impacting and the larvae and early life history stages of American shad. So, and then of course, the hatchery program is there is a role of hatchery propagation in shad recovery. I don't think anybody in the room is in favor or was in favor of having a hatchery production program such that it's basically a one-way stream, just putting fish in, stocking as a means of recovery. You could be doing that forever, but the hatchery does have a role in this, understanding the ecology, the behavior, how early life history stages are functioning, how they do what they do in different conditions. That's a very important role that hatcheries can play. Also, just to get people excited about, American shad, seeing shad growing. But this is an important thing to get people excited into for shad to be to get them recovered. Climate change is also an issue. It's not something that necessarily can be addressed directly, but to basically have a predictable pattern or a predictable result can allow us to do what we can. There's strong evidence. Well, it's not just evidence of fact. Fish are coming back earlier in the season, but we don't know what they're feeding on, when they're feeding, when they're out migrating, when they hatch and develop. Is there a food source? If there's not, then that tells us another, gives us another aspect of how to mitigate against losses. So I think that the take home is that there isn't one aspect of this that will be able to address it. It's going to be a more holistic approach to recovery. But at the end of the day, whatever is good for American shad is going to be good for a whole lot of other species within the watershed, within the river system. So within the report, we have specific projects that we propose that address and aim to recover American shad, ranked and prioritized and laid out there, and that's where we are.
Thank you, Eric. That was excellent. I think you really laid out how multifaceted the plan is and its directives and the different areas that need to be explored next. I guess to move things on to those next steps, Mike, if you'd be so kind.
Certainly, and I'd like to request that I get to go before Albert or Eric next time, because I can't touch Eric's expertise or Albert's charisma, but I'll do my best to talk about DWR's role in all of this and some of what we're up to and how it fits in with the next stages of implementation with the plan. So first of all, I just want to start off with kind of an overview of what DWR does relative to American shad. And a big part of our role is trying to improve habitats, trying to improve access to habitats, and monitoring what's going on. So fish passage is a big priority for us over at DWR. We always want to see dam removals where possible, with fish passage as a backup option. And to be clear, fish passage is a backup option, things like fish ladders relative to dam removal, but recognize that a lot of these different sites have historic or recreational significance, and we do the best we can where we can find opportunity. As far as it goes with our commitments, with our resources, we have a fish passage coordinator on staff. I noticed that he's actually attending here, so I may be sending him emails in the background furiously to answer specific questions that may come up, Alan Weaver. And we also have a stream restoration specialist who helps us make sure that we're prioritizing our projects and doing a good job to restore stream sections when we provide passage, removal, et cetera, et cetera. And that's Louise Finger, based out of our Verona office. We do an extensive amount of monitoring. You can see there Mateus Gaffney with a shad caught via electrofishing. And we do electrofishing at the dam at Boshers as well as Walkers to get an idea of relative abundance of American shad, as well as hickory shad. We monitor fish passage over at Boschers with the video monitoring and shad cam. I'll get into that in a little bit more detail to make another point in the near future. And we also do a lot of juvenile monitoring with push nets in the tidal James, as well as in the Boschers pool. And the juvenile abundance index is critically important because you need information on juvenile abundance, you need information on adult abundance to ultimately assimilate it into a model that helps us understand what's going on with the populations. As Eric and Albert both alluded to, this is a complex, multifaceted issue. This is a fish that has a lot of different life stages, a lot of different needs, and we need to monitor these as we can within the river systems, because it's admittedly very difficult to monitor these fish once they get out into the ocean. You know, I thought after we got through the introductions, my really exciting shad story was actually seeing an American shad in the Gulf of Maine captured in a trawl net on the National Marine Fisheries Service's survey in 530 feet of water, 50 miles offshore, mixed in with halibut and Acadian redfish. It just blew my mind to see shad out there, and then to see juveniles up in these river systems is just amazing to me. One thing I want to point out with DWR's role here, so it's kind of a complex multi-agency approach to dealing with shad and the issues that face them. Shad ultimately fall to VMRC as an Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission managed species, but we do a lot of complementary work in the rivers. And when it comes to things like water withdrawals came up a lot, as well as different actions taking place within the river. We're a consulting agency on DEQ and MRC permits. So MRC would regulate dredging, DEQ would regulate water withdrawals. We're consulted and we weigh in on the relative impacts that we think particular projects will have on resources such as American shad. And we're also responsible for developing the bounds of time of year restrictions, which are in place to protect these fish when they're in the rivers, and impose pretty significant restrictions on activities, including dredging, that can occur when these fish are likely to be in the river. And our time of year restrictions are not only in place to protect things like American shad, but also other species such as Atlantic sturgeon. So on to the next slide there. So another big part of what we do is raising awareness about American shad. We're fortunate enough to have an outreach section at the Department of Wildlife Resources. Alex McCrickard is the public face of this. You'll see him in a lot of our materials. And he's responsible for a lot of the social media and website content that you'll see about American shad. Another thing we have is actually our second most popular wildlife live feed is our shad cam. If you haven't tuned into it every spring, we have people get very, very excited about watching shad cam. Set up over there at Boschers Dam gives you the opportunity to go in real time and see what's passing through that fishway. And it's very popular. The most popular is actually our falcon cam, which I also highly recommend, but just a little bit less than our shad cam. I'm more of a shad person than a falcon person. But another thing we do a lot of, again, I alluded to Alex McCrickard in the outreach, is working with angler education. So as we read through the plan, there's a lot of information there about potential sources of mortality, and there's a lot of recreational fishing that occurs in the James River. Realistically, if we were to restrict angling in the James River during the time when shad were in there, we'd restrict an awful lot of other fisheries for what would more or less be a minimal benefit to it. So it's extremely complicated. That being said, we want to make sure that anglers aren't accidentally keeping American shad because it is lawful to keep hickory shad. So we do a lot of work to get identification out there with our social media on our website. And you see a picture there as just part of some of the things Alex pulled together to help anglers better identify the difference between American shad and hickory shad. Another thing is with release and handling techniques. Shad are fairly fragile. A lot of our fish species that support sport fish opportunities are fragile. We've really been working to let people know better handling techniques so they can reduce post-release mortality. That's a big thing Alex is working on. And as an angler myself who's done a lot of catch and release fishing, something I take very personally as well. Looking into the next steps and how we can better implement parts of the plan there. Basically looking at the existing efforts and newly emphasized priorities. I've already been in discussions with my folks about how we can complement and begin to work on some of these strategies. We've got a budget under development, always looking at where we're allocating staff resources. We're already considering where these fit into what we're doing, how we can better supplement it, and how we can potentially expand our sampling efforts. There's a lot of places where expanded sampling effort is called for. We're looking at our capacity and how we can better fulfill those needs. Again, having information on different life history stages is critically important in understanding how these populations function and how they respond to different factors in the river. And further, looking to collaborate with our sampling and where it fits into other efforts and how we can help fill those critical information gaps. You know, what you heard a lot of described here today is things like death by 1,000 cuts, a bunch of different factors. The more information we have, the better we can ascertain the relationships of those different factors, whether it's predation by largemouth bass, or blue catfish, whether it's the lack of submerged aquatic vegetation, whether it's the presence of mud on the spawning grounds, whether we're looking at how temperature and flow regimes in the river change with climate change. That can help us understand, and having worked on the last stock assessment of American shad, that information is really lacking. And I think there's a great opportunity to pull all this together and look at the contrast between systems like the James that are depleted and other systems such as the Potomac or the Cooper River down in South Carolina that actually have fairly healthy and robust shad runs. I think there's a lot there. I think we can fill some of those information gaps and get a better handle on what's going on and what we can do to better restore and recover American shad.
Thank you, Mike. That was really excellent. I want to take a brief minute and just try and bring it all back home. And for those of you who are interested, there are a couple of ways you can get involved with issues affecting American shad and the James River. And actually, to start us off, I'm going to kick things over to my colleague at the James River Association, Nathan Thompson, to talk about our first program, actually.
Thanks, Tom. And just briefly, I want to say thank you to all of the speakers that are joining us today. We really appreciate y'all taking the time and sharing your expertise. So thank you. One of the programs that I'm responsible for as the lead policy advocate here at JRA is our River Reps program. And essentially, it's sort of the citizen advocacy arm of the James River Association. So one of our big thrusts is putting forward strong legislation that protects and connects citizens to the river, and also promoting conservation-minded budget priorities. And I always like to say that kind of the best way to interface with legislators is to put a face to an issue. A lot of times there are many competing priorities, which are all very good in their own ways. But if we can put faces to issues and show how budget asks and how legislation are affecting the individuals that rely on the river for recreation and for economy and for just having great wildlife around us, we can really multiply our impact. So I think my colleague Aaron Hillert just put the link into the chat to get involved with our River Reps program. And I really would encourage anybody to do that. And I believe we have a few individuals on the call right now who have kind of took up when we asked folks for help regarding a VIPD's permit in the last few weeks, and that was a really successful campaign that was driven by our awesome JRA members. So a big thank you to all of y'all, and we'll continue to try to do good work as we head into the General Assembly here. And it's getting closer every single day. It's like being sucked into a black hole. So I will pass it back to you, Tom.
Thank you, Nathan. In addition to our River Reps program and our River Action Network, James River Association's River Rats program is geared towards individuals who want to patrol the river and the watershed and help us keep an eye on issues that may impact the James. River rats frequently help identify issues in the river, things like pollution events and fish kills and sewer overflows. These types of incidents that can affect fish and wildlife and water quality. Information and registrations for these programs can be found on JRA's website, and I think we can drop a link in the chat for that as well. With that, I'm going to ease us into our Q&A since we've offered some JRA programs just now, and see if I can't get Eric Hilton to talk about opportunities that folks might have with VIMS, and then give Mike a chance as well. What do you got for us, Eric?
Yeah, so the best way to specific to shad issues is to reach out to me specifically. I can I'll put my email in the chat. If you are interested in learning how you might be involved from doing things through VIMS. I can't type and talk at the same time. Oh, thank you. So, and then also just generally, there's opportunities to volunteer at VIMS, just generally, and you can go to the website there. There's a volunteer coordinator that you can reach out to there in the chat, and reach out and yeah, we'd love to have people involved. Again, as I mentioned, it will take an army.
Thanks, Eric. Mike, do you have anything for us?
I got two things. Again, I talked about ShadCam earlier. I think it's important to pay attention to some of the media that we're putting out and then share it through your contact networks. That's my shameless plug, to share some of the content we're putting out there. But things like ShadCam, things like our angler education program, I think provide a lot of really exciting information about American shad, help to tell the story, and they're written with the intent of sharing with the general public as well as school groups. So strongly recommend that. And I'm going to do my shameless pitch to purchase a fishing license. And it may sound counterintuitive that a fishing license is what would support conservation, but the funding model that we have in the United States actually hinges on fishing license sales and then excise tax from fishing tackle sales, which goes to the states on a formula based off of population, land area, as well as the number of licenses sold. Okay, shameless sales pitch. That's the work that directly funds and underpins what the department does. That's what pays for staff time. That's what pays for electroshocking effort, our survey efforts. So when you're buying a fishing license, that directly supports what we're trying to do. And those are resources that we can help put towards things like shad monitoring and recovery. So that's my shameless sales pitch for fishing licenses and how it supports DWR.
That was perfect. Thank you both for adding some links. Albert, I do want to give you the opportunity, if there's anywhere that you would like to direct folks to, happy to hear.
Well, the one thing is probably secondary to anybody's listening in, and that's, make your votes count when you vote in election. Vote for those people who don't have the head in the sand, and understand the importance of ecosystems and conservation and what it all means to us in society.
Thank you, Albert. And I guess that formally opens up our Q&A session here for the evening. I know we've been really rolling right along here, and it's 7:26. I hope all of you can stick around for a little bit as we try and answer some of these questions, but try and being conscious of everyone's time this evening. Tomoko, I believe that you inserted a question in the chat a while back, and I just want to make sure that we get the chance to try and address that now. Do you want to direct that to anyone in particular?
Yes, Albert. How serious is the catfish? Because they used to eat catfish. Now people don't eat catfish much, but maybe we should encourage people to catch catfish and eat them. What do you think?
There's currently has been an active catfish fishery in the James River since forever. The James River Association is even encouraging now that we start programs to reduce the catfish standing stock in the river by trying to reach processors. I don't know the details of that, but there are active catfish fishermen on the James River as well as other rivers. There was one program, and Mike, you might have more information on this one, a couple of years ago, where there was an experimental permit issued to a waterman to use electrofishing as a means to harvest blue catfish. And over 3 years from the James and the Pamunkey River, that waterman harvested 1 million pounds of catfish. I believe there are active permits now to allow 1 or 2 people to electrofish as a means of harvesting blue catfish on the James and in the York River. And maybe the Rappahannock. Mike, you got anything to add there?
Yeah, thanks, Albert, for the opportunity. I wanted to talk a little bit about blue catfish population, what we know about that in the James. Well, there's actually quite a bit of information out there. There was a recent paper by Jan Zhao and Corbin Hilling that came out looking at the response of the blue catfish population to certain harvest levels. And it actually looks like around 2015 or 2016, we were able to get enough fishing pressure to start to show a response in the blue catfish population going down. And though I know everybody seems to think there's a ton of big blue catfish in that river, we've seen about a 10-fold decline since the peak abundance of those larger blue catfish in that system. And a big part of the decline we're seeing in blue catfish is that commercial fishing pressure. And, you know, one thing, I know a lot of you on the call know me and know that I simultaneously be the biggest advocate for that recreational fishery and also the other person talking for the decline. Because we're in a situation where if we're able to reduce blue catfish abundance, we can not only reduce the negative impacts, but it'll actually improve the recreational fishery because it'll improve growth rates. So I actually think there's a lot of common ground with balancing the opportunities for commercial fishing, the removing some of the negative impacts, and then again, providing a resource that, you know, the blue catfish fishery is more popular than largemouth bass on the James River. But there's a lot of aspects to it. And if I'm being honest with the group, I think this is one of the most challenging resource issues that we face from the Department of Wildlife Resources, as well as in the Chesapeake Bay, with balancing objectives and challenges.
Thank you, Mike. Stuart Lee, I see that you've got your hand raised.
Yes, I have a question about heron and hickory shad and white shad are obviously similar. They make a similar migration. It seems like the heron and the white shad, or American shad, are suffering in hard times. But why is it that hickory shad seems to be holding up so well and come back in strong every year? And they face the same challenges as the other two. Has anybody ever studied that? Can anyone explain that?
I can give you a flippant answer that was told to me while I was working. We haven't done anything to manage hickory shad, so they do well. But I don't know the answer to that question. But it's a good point. We've all scratched our head and asked that same question.
Okay, thank you.
Mike, it looked like you almost wanted to answer part of that too. Do you have something you'd like to add?
I was just going to add that seems to be one of the biggest mysteries we have in the diadromous fish community is we can't for the life of us figure out why hickory shad are doing so well. And there was a time when hickory shad were doing very poorly and nobody had seen a hickory shad. And a certain set of conditions came up. Hickory shad did well. I'm optimistic that could happen with American shad. I just wish we had a better idea on what those conditions needed to be.
This
is
Yeah, I was going to say,
This is
we've got
Alan
a
Weaver.
volunteer expert joining the call too, Alan. If you'd like to give your 2 cents on this, that'd be great. Could you give
Yeah, I
yourself
would
a little introduction before you get going though, please?
Sure. Yeah, this is Alan Weaver. I'm the Fish Passage Coordinator for Department of Wildlife Resources, and it's been a great webinar so far. Yeah, the only thing I want to say about hickory shad is that they do tend to repeat spawn much more frequently. So they will, in a given hickory shad's life, it might spawn 3 or 4 times, where most American shad mid-Atlantic only spawn once. And they, and they also are reaching sexual maturity somewhat faster. So that's just one idea as to maybe why they have rebounded a little faster than some of the other species. But generally speaking, it is kind of a mystery and they also don't tend to seem to want to go as far upstream as the other fish. So maybe they're okay with the amount of habitat they already have. But we do see them getting above the Rappahannock rapids in Fredericksburg, but we don't see them pushing up through the James River rapids. So that's just one thing to throw out there about hickory shad.
Thank you, Alan. I appreciate that added detail. I've got a question that came in from a JRA staffer here. How does the decline of American shad in the James relate to populations in other rivers on the East Coast? And what are possible reasons for the differences? Mike, you want that one?
I would love to wildly speculate on this one. We've seen a lot of contrast in the health of shad runs across the coast. And for a system like the James doing very poorly, there's a system like the Potomac. I mentioned the Cooper River earlier. The Connecticut River is not doing too badly. My wild speculation on what's causing that is that it has to do with habitat within the rivers. I think so. When you have a fish like American shad, conditions need to be right for the egg, for the larva, for the small shad, for the juvenile shad, then the adult shad. Conditions have to be right in a lot of different places. There's something they call elasticity in terms of population growth potential, and Alan indirectly alluded to it with discussion about the reproductive potential of hickory shad versus American shad. So what you end up with is this situation where differences in survival rate at early life history stages have much greater impacts on the ultimate state of the population, the overall growth potential. It's analogous to money invested 20 years ago versus money invested today. Changes 20 years ago have much more of an impact on what you have today than if you invested a year ago. My wild speculation is that the systems that are doing well with American shad have much better SAV levels. They have a much greater quantity of that type of habitat.
Hey,
which
Mike,
seems to be
do you want to describe the acronym SAV for us?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm getting into the jargon land, aren't I? I thought I did a good job with basic stock assessment work, so then I tripped on SAV.
You're doing great.
Submerged aquatic vegetation. That type of habitat is fundamentally important for a lot of different fish species. And systems like the Potomac or the Connecticut River or the Cooper River have a lot of submerged aquatic vegetation. That's in direct contrast to a system like James, where the main stem James is almost completely lacking submerged aquatic vegetation. And unless you get into the tributaries, it's very difficult to find that. And it even prompts the question about how we can better restore it, and also raises issues about how invasive vegetation like hydrilla may actually be a help if it can get established in some of those areas, when we would look at it as an invasive to control, because it's very prevalent in the Potomac or the Cooper rivers, which have excellent shad populations.
Mike, as a follow-up to that, are there artificial structures or things like that that could be added to the riverbed to kind of create that habitat?
Anything we would do in that realm, I would think would be symbolic, looking at the extent of habitat we would need. We actively utilize artificial structures to manage fish habitat for sport fishing opportunities. And there's always this debate between, does it enhance productivity or does it enhance accessibility? It enhances accessibility and it makes fish easier to catch. With that in mind, that would make it unlikely for us to drop that plastic habitat into a system like the James and expect it to appreciably impact habitat for juvenile American shad. Something like vegetation that can get established and cover acres and miles, that's the type of thing that would have a real measurable increase on the productivity for fish stocks in the James River.
And I'll just add on to that, that any of those, the sort of mitigation efforts that you might do in promoting the kind of hard bottom habitat, for instance, there's a small longevity to that, without addressing the issues of sedimentation and siltation. Those habitats are just going to revert back to what they are now, and they're not gonna, we need to figure out the issues of sort of the point sources of those, that sedimentation, rather than just putting hard bottom in the river.
That's a great point.
Could I ask another question, Tomoko?
Please.
Yeah. How about the American Indians' involvement? I learned a little bit about the hatchery effort in York River tributaries, and when James had a depletion of shad, they were trying to do it, but it's all failed. And also cultural legacy of shad in Potomac is great because of George Washington's legacy, while Potomac River had all the money, while we may not have it. What do you think of the socio-cultural historical legacy of shad related to current program of James River? Thank you.
Wow, that was a well-rounded question touching on a lot of different bases. Does anyone want to take a crack at that one?
Our program is always historical. That's what I want to say.
Well, regarding Native American involvement, we haven't had much Native American involvement for American shad restoration when we were doing it on the James River. But the Pamunkey and the Mattaponi nations both ran hatcheries on the Pamunkey rivers and the Mattaponi River. They did it for years, and I don't know if it's made a difference, but it seems to be a fairly decent population of American shad on the Pamunkey River. So it might have made a difference. And I think the socioeconomic impact of American shad it's just something that we need to address. Frankly, I believe that politicians, that's what they wrap their brains around, is what am I doing for my constituents? So what's my constituents going to get out of a restored American shad population? We know at one point that the American shad was the #1 economic fin fish in the whole Chesapeake Bay.
Exactly.
So those are the kinds of things we need to sell. Historically, I'm getting a little concerned that people that normally enjoyed American shad, there's very few of them around anymore. So what can we do to increase consumerism with American shad? We're not there yet, but how do we get people interested in eating American shad once again? That old bony fish, really bony. But when it's smoked, oh my God, it's something good to eat.
Great. And then, Pamunkey and Mattaponi has a historical knowledge. And it's a shame that scientists don't tap into that thing. And then I agree, Albert, young Indians are not interested in this bony fish. It's elderlies and it's a cultural legacy. And we have in Gloucester 40th State Park, which are dedicated to Indians. First time, if you don't know, it's not far from BIMS, and we should involve the people who have the stake in commercial and other way. Up to 1960s, Indians are only one who are allowed to fish shad. And it was in York River and some James River. And, you know, science shouldn't be historically blind about these things. Thank you.
I was over at the Mattaponi tribe just a few weeks ago, and what's happened on both of these tribes is that the historical knowledge of spawning and raising shad in a hatchery, all those people are gone. So it's not that we can't train new people. We still, the WR still have hatchery people that's worked with both of those tribes before. So that's something could be done, but that historical knowledge at those sites is currently not there anymore.
Well, it's
Yeah.
like Indian language. Algonquian Indian language is almost gone. So, you know, we always do it when the shad is almost gone. We start thinking about restoration. It's the same thing. And I urge you people to let's have a coalition and involve the people. Elders are dying, as I agree, and we have to put these people in there. It's a sign in many ways to hear the indigenous legacy into shad, because one of the reasons Potomac River was successful on the shad is the George Washington legacy, you know, Valley Forge and onward. And we can use a lot of things for publicity stake, including influencing politicians. And I think scientists should stop just doing a data analysis. It's about time to save the fish, which is all gone now.
Tomoko, that's a great point. And Eric, I think you were getting ready to tee up talking about the partner integrations and the development of the plan and the next steps a little bit.
Yeah, so I did want to make the point that we had representatives from both the Pamunkey and the Mattaponi at both of our meetings, and their voices are heard and incorporated into this document. And for my time at VIMS, I've been working to build collaborations and to continue those partnerships. I can look up there's a podcast that I met with some of the elders in the Mattaponi a couple of years ago and discussed American Shad specifically about how about their hatchery program, what the fish meant to their people, and you can't separate that from the science and the recovery of American shad. So know that all voices and all stakeholders are being brought into the fold.
Thank you. I think that there's a question that I think is lingering out there that I had queued up from me for the group here, which is, have other aquatic species that have experienced significant population declines been able to recover, and are there some success stories that can be shared?
Well, not recovered. Well, I mean, the first species that come to mind is striped bass. It wasn't back in the late 1980s. There was a moratorium on striped bass fishing. We got involved, and again, the most successful programs involve partnerships because none of us can do it alone. But I can remember working with the game department at that time on the striped bass restoration program for the York River. It became very successful. It was successful, but we had to look at that issue not only from a stocking but from a management perspective as well. So there was some very serious management decisions made about the species with the moratorium. There was an experimental stocking program, and eventually it worked. Those fish came back, and everybody knows that story. Another species that's currently, and I can't say it's restored because it's listed as endangered, but the Atlantic sturgeon in the James River. It's probably the healthiest river we have with the Atlantic sturgeon in the Chesapeake Bay. It's probably maybe one of the healthiest along the East Coast. But it wasn't that many years ago where folks were saying that they weren't there. But Virginia made a decision, intentional decision back in the 1970s to institute a fishing moratorium, and I think it made a big difference in sustaining the at that time the spawning stock. So there was a sustainable population in that river to carry that species forward, and it's doing pretty well. And the James are not out of the woods yet, but we see sturgeon, and you can go catch a sturgeon almost anytime you want now.
Thank you, Albert. Do we have any other questions lingering out there, folks? Wow, I want to say thank you to everybody for sticking around a little bit later. I know that we were thinking we might wrap up by 7:30, but I think at the end of this Q&A here, this is going to conclude tonight's webinar. I just want to say thank you to tonight's experts for giving us their time this evening, and thank you to the many partners responsible for crafting the American Shad Recovery Plan for the James. And I really want to say thank you to the JRA staff working tonight to help me make this webinar possible. You can visit thejamesriver.org for more information about the James River Association. You can also view our State of the James report at thestateofthejames.org to learn about the 17 other indicators we use to describe the river health, with our most recent report for 2023 having just come out this fall. With that, that's going to wrap things up, and just thank you very much, everybody.
Good night. Happy holidays.
Thank you.